Welcome to the Elaborate Topics podcast, where we focus on lab-specific strategies for medical laboratory professionals. We're proud to be the healthcare detectives that work behind the scenes to get the results needed to influence medical decisions. Let's grow together and jump right into the lab.
Welcome to another episode of Elaborate Topics. We are your hosts, Tywauna Wilson, Stephanie Whitehead, and Lona Small. We are here with another amazing episode. Can you believe we have been doing this for over 2 years now, ladies?
That is crazy. That went by so fast. I cannot believe it.
Yes, I got a reminder on my Facebook for I think it was the third episode that I did. And I was like, I can't believe it's over 2 years.
Mhm.
So we have been doing this over 2 years, and from time to time, we actually get some requests from you all. So today's show is by special request. We have actually gotten several requests on this topic. But before we jump into it, if this is your first time tuning in to Elaborate Topics, it's a weekly podcast where we give you practical strategies that you can use both inside and outside of the laboratory. If you are just now getting acclimated to this show, check out our 100th episode. You can find it on directimpactbroadcasting.com or your favorite podcast platform. And you will find tons of episodes that we mentioned that will give you a great foundation. But let's jump into today's episode. We are going to talk about those who are stuck in the middle. I know that's deep, right? Stuck in the middle.
Stuck in the middle with you.
Yeah, you're stuck in the middle. You have gotten promoted, so you have transitioned from the bench technologist role. You've gotten a promotion, and guess what? Now you're stuck. And you felt like you were going to have all this level of authority, but yet it still feels like you don't really have it. So being stuck in the middle, you probably have a role that might be a team leader role or a coordinator, or it could be a section supervisor, or it could even be a technical specialist, depending on how your organization classifies it. It's that technical expert within your organization. It's serving as that technical lead for a specific discipline. So most companies call them a lead tech. At my particular organization, we call them coordinators, but I've also seen where people call them a section supervisor or a technical specialist for chemistry or hematology or blood bank. So you've gotten promoted, and now you have the authority over your discipline. You are the go-to person for hematology, for chemistry, for blood bank. You are responsible for all things CAP, COLA, Joint Commission. So when the inspectors come into your laboratory, guess who they are looking for? Usually they're looking for you. You are that person to make sure that all of those standards are in compliance. Everything that the inspector needs is in nice binders or in electronic format. And it seems like the weight of the lab is on your shoulders. But you have a problem. The staff doesn't report to you, right? So the staff still reports to your manager or supervisor, depending on how your organization structure is. And you have the authority over your discipline, but not the people. So when you have your techs work in your particular areas and they don't check off on maintenance logs, or you find that maybe somebody took a shortcut here or there, didn't follow the procedure exactly as written, and now it's time to hold those people accountable, but they don't report to you. So what do you do? What do you do in that case? So today's episode, we're going to dig deeper into this of being a middle manager, having that promotion where you're excited to talk about your technical expertise and all things within your specific discipline, but you're having that overwhelm and that stress because you don't feel like you can hold your teammates accountable because they do not report to you. Now you have maintenance logs that has holes in them. You have competency assessments that are incomplete. You have reagent that's not been labeled. You have QC that could be expired in your refrigerator. And you are like, what the heck? What am I supposed to do? Can you all relate to any of that, or have you heard about any of that in your laboratories?
I mean, I think it's a very difficult position to be in. And I think many people who are listening to this will be able to relate to this episode because we unfortunately create a lot of positions like this in the laboratory. We have so much technical stuff to oversee. And we have so much of a need for compliance and standard oversight that we end up creating these positions that also need, like you said, authority, but the role doesn't really the road doesn't really account for that. And it can make for a very challenging position. You mentioned coordinator, one group of people who I know struggle with this all the time, and I feel for them because they're such experts in their field, are the point of care coordinators. And so they're responsible for all of those results that the nurses put out, and the nurses don't work in the lab and don't report to the lab, but they're up there on the nursing floor putting out, glucose results and all kinds of other stuff, point of care results. And the point of care coordinators are trying their best to get them to come and do a competency, get them to do a proficiency test and QC. And so I know many people in our healthcare world struggle with this.
Yeah. I don't see that a lot, but I hear about that a lot. And I can think of more of the technical roles, as Tywauna said. Say, for instance, you're the one that's doing a lot of the IT work, working with the middleware. You're setting up all the rules. And so you'd want a group of people maybe to set aside specimen for you or do this. And then you're going in between their work, the work that their manager or supervisor gave them to do, to say, I need for you to do so and so. And maybe they will be supportive, maybe they may not. Maybe they may just say, I'm busy. And then it's hard for you to get your work done unless you have a method in which to get it done. But by going directly to the team, sometimes it's very challenging. Depending on the organization, an education coordinator may have challenges. Even sometimes the QC technologists or even the quality people could have challenges depending on the structure or depending on the maybe the custom of the organization. So I can see where it becomes a big challenge if people are not very sensitive to it, if they're not aware of it, if leadership is not aware of some of those challenges that could happen. I can see how easily people in these roles, we say middle management, which is kind of broad, but people who don't have authority over a group of people could have these challenges.
Absolutely. And, sometimes there's a whole lack of clarity in the role, right? So you get promoted. I mean, historically, people would work in a laboratory as a bench technologist, and the next step historically would be into a lead tech or supervisor or a section supervisor type of role. And what happens is you have that technical expertise because you got promoted into that because you were very strong in hematology or blood bank or what QC or quality or whatever the case may be. So you're very strong in that regard, but now you have to make sure that these processes are instituted. And sometimes you are the expert, like nobody else may have the same level of expertise that you have in that particular discipline. I've seen it, especially in some of the special areas such as toxicology or serology, where the person who is the lead, they are the expert. And there could be that disconnect sometimes when even the manager, because the manager's not on the bench typically often or every day. And so they don't even have the same level of technical expertise as that person in that particular regard. And so it's like that role, you know, people, you need people to listen to you because you have these processes that you need to put in place. But at the same token, they're like, well, you're not doing my evaluation. You're not, you know, the one that's going to give me a raise or not, or whatever the case may be. So you start to see that lack of clarity in oversight, like who is responsible. You know, so the person that's the lead want to hold the staff accountable, but at the end of the day, the person doesn't report to them. And I can remember us getting, and I don't know what medium we got this from. I don't know if it was an email or if it was on YouTube or something like that, but I remember this coming up a couple of times too, where we had somebody reach out to us and they said that, you know, they felt kind of stuck in their role. So they felt sandwiched in between their supervisor and their team. Like they were that expert, as I was talking about with toxicology or serology. And you see this happen in blood bank too, these highly specialized area. And they felt like that they were, you know, kind of sandwiched into that role. They were the expert and they were responsible for everything in that discipline. But yet, you know, the supervisor didn't necessarily have the same level of expertise. So, you know, didn't necessarily understand the pain points that lead or I don't know if they was a tech specialist or coordinator or whatever their organization called, but they felt like the supervisor didn't have that connection with the difficulty and being able to, you know, push standardization, push process improvement, push making sure that things were dated correctly, labeled correctly, and all of that. And it was very overwhelming. I don't know if the person stayed in the role or not. They really didn't give that level of clarity, but it sounded like it was something like, you know, I was excited to get this promotion and the opportunity because I was, you know, so strong, but then I got into the role and really felt like that I couldn't even make, you know, the improvements needed because I didn't have the level of authority over the people. You all have any thoughts around that?
I mean, yeah, it's very easy when you're in a position like this to quickly become disengaged, because then it doesn't take very long for the barriers to appear and for your own shortcomings in your scope to become taxing and become stressful. You know, like you said in the beginning, you have the responsibility, you have the accountability. So when inspections come, when audits come, when your boss is looking at things that may not have been done, maybe when there's an error that reaches the patient and risk management is asking you to put together a corrective action plan, you are the one who's responsible and accountable for those things. But it is hard to get those things accomplished when maybe you're understaffed. And it's actually a position that more than one person should be responsible for, or when nobody else respects or understands the scope, or when you just don't have the authority to enforce the things you need to enforce to make your job successful. And so it is very easy, and we hear it a lot. And so I'm looking forward to our listeners being able to hear some of the simple tips that we have for them to be successful in this situation, because we hear it a lot. And like I said, these roles are not uncommon in the clinical laboratory field.
Yeah, and I know Lona has some great tips for people that's in this space of being able to work successfully in that role. And I know later you'll talk a little bit about what they can do when working with their manager. So Lona, what kind of tips can you give to that coordinator, that team leader, that person that's in that middle management role where they do have a very large job and scope, but yet they don't have the people power to be able to move it forward. And sometimes they haven't been trained too on the people part of maneuvering this whole situation.
Yeah, and I heard Stephanie said that this kind of situation can create a lot of stress for anyone that's in that situation. And so we should always be looking for ways in which how can we actually resolve this, or how can we prevent this. And so I'm going to give some tips about how can you prevent this from happening, and if you're already in that situation, how can you actually resolve it or even attempt to resolve it. So I always like to look at preparation, like how can I prepare myself for that role. And I'm going to just mention these things, but I won't go into it. I'm going to go into just step by step. Well, when people are clear about the role that they want to go in, when they're clear about their core values, when they know their core self and have a clear core vision, things like these will prevent you from finding yourself in these unclear situations. So I just mentioned that at the get-go. This is kind of how I train my clients to make sure they're understanding those core. But say, for instance, you're preparing for a job. I like to start with the preparation phase. First, you need to know the goal that you'd want to achieve in that role that you're applying for. So look at the job description, understand the kind of responsibilities that you would have. And while you're reviewing that, write out any questions that you're not clear about when it comes to the responsibility, roles and responsibility. Start writing out questions. And so you can start by asking the recruiter, if there's a recruiter, to clarify certain areas when it comes to roles and responsibility. But if you can't do that, a good time to clarify these things usually during the interview. So you already wrote some things down, questions that you'd want to ask. A lot of times during the interview, a lot of those are cleared up during the interview by your maybe hiring manager. However, you can check off the things that you have answers to, but the things that you don't have answers to, make sure you're asking these things during the interview. So things about your responsibility, what specific areas are you going to be responsible for? What teams will you be responsible for? And I know that they're internal promotion, and they're sometimes people are hiring from outside. And it doesn't matter if you think that you know because you're so familiar, don't take anything for granted. So ask specific questions about, you want to be clear about the areas in which and the team that report to you. And what levels of decisions are you allowed to make? So as a lead, say for instance, if you're a lead, what decisions can you make for the team? Ask about some of the possible roadblocks or challenges that could get in the way of you getting your job done. Because a lot of these challenges you could figure from some of those challenges whether or not you have accountability and authority. And you can be very specific about that. What are the things that you're accountable for? That means you have to make sure that your team get them done. And what are the things that you have the authority to enforce? Because a lot of times you find yourself in situation where you're accountable for a lot of things. They're going to ask you for, like Tywauna and Stephanie was saying, when cap comes, they're going to like, okay, if anything happened, it's going to fall on you. You didn't prepare well. Or when anything happened with your team, you're going to be left accountable. Well, what authority do you have to enforce these accountability. So asking those questions up front when it's more like a neutral situation, that's the best time to ask these questions before you get into the job. And make sure you're clarifying who you will report to. So that's kind of preparing before you get in the role. And say now you're in the role, there's still preparation that you have to do, because a lot of times when you're not clear with, or when there's a lot of overwhelm, is either because you probably didn't get the answers that you needed, or you probably weren't prepared. So when you go in that role, even if you feel as if there may be areas in which you may feel as if you're not prepared, don't hesitate to take the role, because there's an opportunity for you to grow. And they usually hire with that in mind, that there's an opportunity for you to grow. But once you're there, try to seek training. Look for opportunities for training. Ask your manager for training. Look if your institution have training available. Look for mentors. Look for coaches. And it's okay if you make mistakes. That's that opportunity to grow. So being in that role doesn't mean that you, when it comes to preparation, doesn't mean that you have to know everything, but it's a learning and growth. However, you need that support of your manager when it comes to training, mentorship, or even getting mentorship outside. So I'm going to give you some tips, say you're on the job. The first thing I would ask you to do is to get to know your team and talk to your team. Have that clear communication. Find out what their expectations are of you. Find out what expectations they have for themselves as team members, and just generally what their expectations are of the team. Because a lot of time the stress don't always come from your manager, but it could come from the team, because you're stuck in the middle. And you want to make sure you're not only communicating with your manager, you're communicating with your team. So set some goals for yourself, for the team, and for yourself. Then sit with your manager and review those goals. So you're going to, when you set those goals, you want to clarify responsibility again and authority. Responsibility or accountability is probably similar. It's just that you have a list of responsibility, but they're going to hold you accountable for those. But you want to make sure you have authority to enforce those. Clarify the timelines of when these goals are expected for you to, or projects are expected. Find out from your manager or boss if there's going to be any accommodations like time off the bench, or are they going to accommodate you to block times? Will there be leadership support? Will the leader be willing to email the team to say, this is what Lona is working on, and this is what we are working on as a team, and at least demonstrating their support. So you're sitting down with your manager, you're having that conversation, you're finding out from your manager timeline, accommodation, and support. Now, for you, also share that with your team to get support. So you're being proactive in getting the support of your manager and also of your team. So some people may be saying, what if I'm already in the situation? You're talking about somebody who is just getting a new job. If you're in this situation, you're overwhelmed, you're unsupported by your boss and your team, you still have that opportunity to have that talk. You still have that opportunity. It's never too late to have that talk with your team, to have that talk with your boss, and ask for support. But then somebody may be saying, what if my boss, I have that talk with my boss and they still don't support me? And I'm in that situation of overwhelm. I'm unsupported by my boss. I'm unsupported by my team. I am accountable for things and I have no authority to enforce them. Then that's when you're going to have that talk, that talk that a lot of people don't want to have, but it's important to have. If you're in a situation where you're stressed constantly every day with no support, you need to have that talk. And, you need to tell your boss how you feel. You need to tell them, first of all, what's going on, what's the situation, how is it making you feel, and what would you like to see happen. And expect your boss to make a change. If you don't see any change based on how it's making you feel, what's going on in terms of that discrepancy, the goal is for you to remove your overwhelm, your stress. You want to have accountability that's moving. Either you're going to move your accountability down to match your authority, or you're going to move the authority to match your accountability. And that would mean that you could have to step down, or it could mean that it's a win-win where your boss would allow you to do that, or there's three things, or you live with it. So then you make a choice. Do I want to live with it? Do I want to make that adjustment? If the boss will allow me to adjust, that would be the goal. Or would I have to make that choice to step down, or do I want to live with it? So those are some of the tips. It was a lot, but I'm going to allow the next, Stephanie has some great tips for managers to support, or for the leader that you report to support middle managers in these scenarios.
Thank you, Lona. And, as you were talking, I was thinking that anybody can really find themselves in these situations. In my job, particularly, I'm not necessarily a middle manager, but I do get given projects that require for me to work with other people who don't report to me necessarily. And when you were talking, what came to mind was I was given a project of lowering our hemolysis rate for the nursing staff. But the nursing staff don't report to me. And it was a very difficult task because you're really tasked with overseeing the scope of something that's not within your authority range. And really, I did, exactly what Lona mentioned. I went to my boss and I detailed, these are the things that are within my responsibility, my scope, and things that I can impact. I can give you data, I can give you training, I can help, sit on any committee and recommend supplies, needles, etc. But in order for this to be successful, I'm going to need a nurse champion. I'm going to need a person to hold those collectors accountable. And really, it's one of those situations where you don't say no, you say yes if. Yes, we can be successful if you're willing to do this part. And then you leave the rest on the person that you report to. Now, if you are the person in that reporting seat, if you are the leader in this situation, then your role is to really be accountable. As leaders, sometimes it's difficult, but you have to be accountable for the fact that you have staff that are in this situation. And the expectation as a leader is that you create an organizational structure in that department, in that laboratory, that cultivates a culture where everybody can be successful. And so my first tip to leaders would be basically being accountable and understanding that you have roles in your laboratory that have these challenges, that are middle management, that are, like Tywauna says, they are integral to our success as a laboratory. These people are specialists. We only have one or two of them in the laboratory. With the national workforce shortage, there's probably only a couple of them locally or in the state. We need them, but we have to take responsibility for the fact that you have placed them in this position. And, the first step to solving a problem is admitting that there is a problem, right, as a leader. So understanding that the expectation of these roles is to be both dominant and have oversight and all this responsibility and all this accountability, but that you've also asked them to be subordinate. I would have to go and ask the supervisor to hold their staff accountable. And being in that position is confusing for that person at times, and it can create role conflict. because they're called to be both supervisors, because they're responsible for policies and procedures and things like that, but also not be supervisors. I'm thinking of some of these roles, staff can also see them as the police. The quality coordinator, people used to call them the police. They're coming through. The quality coordinator's coming, put your lab coat on. And if you have that culture in your laboratory, you have to address that. You are not responsible for everybody's happiness, but you're responsible for understanding what are the gaps in the culture in our laboratory so that we can be successful. So understanding the challenges is there, and then understanding that it is your job to mitigate that as a leader and help people manage the scope or the misscope of their responsibilities. Also, I think the next step I would have is take some time to look at your organizational structure and see if you can eliminate some of these things, or you can make a little bit more clarity in your organizational charts. I love org charts that do the dotted line. And so on some org charts, there's the hard line, the straight line, which means I report directly to this person, or indicates a direct reporting structure. But a dotted line oftentimes signifies that although I don't report to this person, I'm still responsible to this person. And so when Tywauna said, well, this person isn't doing my eval, but I have say so on the input of your eval, the person who is doing your eval might come to me for my input. And so you still need to create a good rapport with me. That helps give that person a little bit of that authority back in their role. I would also say, if you are the leader of a technical supervisor, a specialist, a coordinator, a lead, make sure that you're communicating with them often. A lot of problems come because there's just lack of communication or ineffective communication, or there isn't active listening. So set aside some time to have frequent meetings, one-on-ones, and really understand the challenges and the barriers of their specific situation, the people that they're encountering, maybe the pathologists or the medical directors they're not getting a response from because their title isn't just important enough, and help them, like I said, mitigate those challenges and break through those things. A lot of time allowing people to have the freedom to do their job and not being micromanaged helps them to feel dominant and helps them to grow in that position. So create an environment where this person doesn't have to be afraid to make decisions and do their job. But then also, I love what Lona mentioned about, asking for your leader to support you on the projects. And so if your coordinator, if your lead has a project that they are working on, use your name as that leader to back that project. Send an email. If I'm the leader, I'm going to send an email to my whole staff and say, we have a project that we're working on in chemistry, and I've asked Tywauna to oversee it. My expectation is that everybody work with Tywauna. Now I've just set Tywauna up for success. I let everybody know that this is something that I am supporting Tywauna on. Tywauna has my full backing, and then she feels empowered to go and do what she has to do to make this successful. So, if you're really struggling, put your name behind it and give her that level of backing, him or her or they, that level of backing and support. Also give them visibility. A lot of times in our laboratory, especially our medical directors, our pathologists, if you work in an academic environment, the residents and the fellows don't understand the role of everybody in the lab. They just see a lot of people running around. And so if you have quality meetings or, clinical meetings, let this person do a presentation on something they've improved, something they need help with. And so people understand the impact of their role and why they're integral and why our support of them is integral to our success. And then finally, I'd say as a leader, and you should do this for every employee, but be aware of brewing issues, and help that employee address them. So if they're having a problem with one particular difficult employee in this role, or the scope of this role is the root cause of that difficult situation, if they have too much work and they're not able to make deadlines, if there's inadequate staffing for this position, make sure that you're listening to those and you're trying to help further those. And I guess another thing I would say, I said that was the last thing, but I lied. I would say, if you can't change your organizational structure to alleviate these, at least look for opportunities of growth for this person so they're not stuck in this middle management position long term or forever. Continue to grow them so maybe they can get to another position with I don't know, lack of a better word, actual title, where they have that authority. What do you ladies think?
No, you made some great points as both of you were talking. It made me think two things. One, managing up those particular people that are in that role. And so making sure that you are giving them that level of authority. Most of the times when I talk about my coordinators, because to people in the hospital, a coordinator may not mean that much. It doesn't speak to the true value of the role. And so I always say the coordinator they are the expert. So giving them that level of authority coming from a senior leader is huge. And so I think as leaders, making sure that you talk up or manage up that particular person. So like you said, with the email, and I stand behind that person and what they say. And what I've also learned too from having leads or coordinators at various sites is that a lot of times there is that role confusion for staff, because depending on how long that person has been in a role or if they have went up through the organization, there's that comfort level there. So that level of trust. So I have seen it where the staff will sometimes go to the coordinator before they go to the manager, even though the manager is the person that they report to. So it can be that role confusion sometimes, in that the coordinator again or the tech specialist or lead tech or however you call them in your organization do have that kind of conflict there, where it's like, I'm over the processes, the technical processes, but you are coming to me because there's that level of trust with maybe HR issues or conflict management issues or other issues that may come up because that level of trust is there. So I was just thinking about that as you all were talking, with people that are in that particular middle management role.
Yeah. And I've seen, especially in my organization, I think a lot of our leads are very empowered, and it's known, it's more part of the culture that if you're a lead, many times you're the only person that we will see. The supervisors, because of the structure, many times are not even on the bench. So the leads are the ones that they'll go to when there's any challenges. The leads are expected to resolve issues in real time. So they get a lot of authority to a certain point, but then they know when to move it to the supervisor. And a lot of things never get to the manager because it's already resolved at the supervisor's level, because the leads are usually there in real time to take care of challenges. So that's kind of clear, and they're given that kind of authority. Another thing that Stephanie mentioned, and I think we probably should mention that that there are a lot of positions like project managers, people are working on projects, and quality people who may not have a team. And I know that a lot of the examples are for the team that report to you, but many times you don't have a team, but you expect to get stuff done. And that's, in those situations, it's so important to sit with whoever is giving you these maybe projects and clarify exactly what to do in different situations. And of course, most times when it's a situation with a team, you're going to have to go to the manager and not deal directly with the team. So having that clarified is important when you're working on projects.
I hope this helps. Like I said, we've gotten, I think, 2 messages like this now, right?
Yeah,
Right.
we have. We've gotten at least 2 where we've talked about it, and I'm sure there are others that feel they are in this spot. because this is a typical role that you see at most organizations.
Yes. So we were happy to take this back to you, and I hope you got a lot of value in this. And if you still have questions, don't be afraid to communicate with us. Go on to directimpactbroadcasting.com. You have opportunities to ask questions, to put your comments, and you can make sure that not only you can listen to us there, you can also request to be a guest on the show, or even request topics, more topics that you'd want us to discuss on the show. And listen to this episode on directimpactbroadcasting.com or any of your favorite podcast platform, and share this out to as many people as possible. And if you love this and you have an opportunity to do a video, so you can go on, there's a link that you can actually do a video testimonial, and we'd love to have you to do that. So until you hear from us again, check us out, and we'll be back next Tuesday with Elaborate Topics podcast. Have a good one.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Elaborate Topics, where your hosts discussed relevant strategies for laboratory professionals. Please subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform and listen to us on directimpactbroadcasting.com. Stay tuned for another episode with information you can use to excel in your laboratory career.